The phone buzzed on the conference table. My eyes drifted from the projector screen to the glowing notification. A message from an unknown number. I should have ignored it. We were in the middle of a critical pitch to a potential investor, but something about the timing made my hand itch to check. I thumbed open the message beneath the table. The picture hit me like a gut punch. Kate, my wife of 12 years, was in the arms of Adam, my business partner. They stood too close, her head on his shoulder, lips brushing his ear. The photo was taken at some private event, a place I didn't recognize. The image screamed intimacy, a level of closeness reserved for lovers. My stomach churned as I scrolled down to see more. Text followed. You deserve to know the truth. The air felt too thick, too hot. I tried to focus on the discussion around me, but the words blurred into background noise. My throat tightened, my chest pounded, and the room seemed to close in. This couldn't be happening. Without making a scene, I slid the phone into my pocket and forced a neutral expression. There was no time for this, not now. The investor sat across from me, nodding as he reviewed the proposal on the screen. Our business, my business with Kate, was on the verge of securing a major deal, one that could redefine our future. I couldn't lose focus, not today. But the photo was burned into my mind. Kate and Adam, my wife and my business partner. The betrayal twisted inside me like a knife. I'll be right back, I muttered, pushing back my chair. I headed for the door, ignoring the raised eyebrows from the team. Once outside, I gulped in fresh air, leaning against the cold hallway wall. My hand trembled as I pulled out the phone again. I stared at the image and then at the message. The words ran through my mind like poison. The truth? What the hell was the truth? Was this just a mistake? A misunderstanding? It had to be. Kate wasn't the type to cheat. We'd built a life together, this business. Our future. But why would someone send me this picture if it wasn't real? I clenched my fists, the anger rising like bile. Adam, my so-called partner, my friend, I wasn't going to explode. Not yet. I needed proof, real proof. And I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of knowing they had gotten to me. I had a meeting to finish. I pushed myself off the wall, straightened my jacket, and returned to the boardroom. But inside, a storm was brewing, one that would soon crash down on both of them. That night, I didn't mention the message to Kate. She was sitting on the couch when I came home, sipping wine and scrolling through her phone. Her smile was the same as always, warm and inviting as if nothing had changed. Long day? She asked, glancing up. Yeah, I replied, my voice calm, betraying none of the rage simmering beneath the surface. Got through the pitch, though. Kate nodded, but I wasn't looking at her face. I was scanning her movements, watching for something, anything that would confirm what I'd seen. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Where had it started? Was I just blind to it all this time? I walked into the kitchen, pretending to grab a beer from the fridge. I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed more than a photo. I needed to be sure before I blew up our lives. Over the next few days, I kept my cool. I played the part of the unsuspecting husband while my mind raced to find ways to uncover the truth. I started checking her phone whenever she wasn't around. But Kate was careful. No texts. No emails that could even hint at an affair. She was smart, I'll give her that. But if there was something between her and Adam, I would find it. I knew where to look. Work became my refuge and my battlefield. Every time I saw Adam, I fought the urge to knock him flat. He had no idea what I knew, and I planned to keep it that way. I wanted to see how far they'd take this charade, how long they'd think they could fool me. But while they were busy playing their game, I had a different plan. I started digging through Adam's files. Late at night, after everyone had gone home, I would go through his financials, combing through transactions, contracts, and anything that seemed out of place. I wasn't just looking for evidence of the affair. I wanted to destroy him. And soon enough, I found it. Small discrepancies at first, missing invoices, unaccounted funds, nothing too obvious, but enough to raise questions. Adam was sloppy, covering his tracks poorly. Maybe he was too distracted by Kate to notice the gaps he left. The deeper I dug, the more I found. He had been skimming money from some of our deals, shifting profits into his own pockets. A few missing thousands here and there siphoned off without a trace, until now. My rage doubled. Not only was he sleeping with my wife, but he was stealing from me. But I wasn't going to blow up yet. No, not yet. I needed to be smart about this. Exposing him for the fraud he was would take precision and patience. I'd wait until everything was perfectly lined up until I had all the proof I needed. Because when I brought him down, I wanted it to be absolute. And when Kate saw the wreckage, I wanted her to know she was standing next to the man who had ruined her life. The storm was coming. The next few weeks were a blur of late nights and subtle questions. I'd perfected the art of keeping up appearances with Kate, all while secretly gathering more evidence on Adam. Every evening, we shared casual conversations, how her day was, how business was going. Meanwhile, I was documenting every financial irregularity Adam had left behind like breadcrumbs. One night, while Kate was asleep, I sat in my office with the lights off, the glow of the computer screen the only source of illumination. I had a file open, a detailed spreadsheet of Adam's fraudulent activity. Every misstep, every stolen dollar was neatly laid out. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the figures. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the deception, the betrayal on multiple levels. Adam had not only stolen Kate, but he had been stealing from me and our business for months, maybe longer. The rage burned deep, but I didn't let it consume me. I had to be calculated. Precision was my weapon now. There was no room for emotion. I needed to let this play out exactly as planned. I began making anonymous reports to the regulatory agencies, presenting them with everything they needed to launch an investigation. With Adam's sloppy bookkeeping, I knew they'd find more than enough to destroy him. The beauty of it all was that Adam had no idea what was coming. He still sat across from me at meetings, cracking jokes like nothing had changed. But I noticed his nervous habits, the way his leg bounced under the table, the slight tremor in his hand when he thought no one was watching. The pressure was getting to him, and he didn't even know I was the one turning the screws. Kate, on the other hand, was oblivious. She went about her daily routines, texting Adam in secret, thinking I was none the wiser. It was almost laughable how careful she thought she was being. But I could see through her now. Every little lie, every excuse, it all pointed to the same truth. I was letting them dig their own graves, and when the time came, I'd bury them both. It was a Thursday when the first real crack appeared. Adam and I were in the office, going over the final preparations for a big client presentation. Everything seemed normal, until his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and his face went pale. "Something wrong?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. He hesitated, then forced a smile. "No, just something personal. Nothing to worry about." I nodded, pretending to brush it off, but I knew exactly what had happened. The auditors had started making their rounds. One of my anonymous tips had triggered an inquiry into Adam's accounts, and now, the walls were starting to close in. That evening, I made sure to get home early. Kate was already there, cooking dinner like everything was normal. She was humming to herself, her back to me as I entered the kitchen. I watched her for a moment, wondering how she could stand there so casually, knowing she'd betrayed me in the worst possible way. "Everything okay at work?" she asked over her shoulder, not even looking at me. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Everything's fine. How was your day?" "Busy," she said, turning to give me a quick smile. "Meetings all day. You know how it is." I nodded, sitting down at the kitchen island, watching her. It was strange, knowing what I knew and seeing how effortlessly she played her role. I wanted to ask her, "How long have you been lying to me?" but I kept my mouth shut. The time for confrontation would come, but not tonight. That night, after dinner, I waited until Kate went to bed before I pulled out my phone and checked the reports. The investigation into Adam's finances was moving faster than I expected. They had already flagged several transactions as suspicious. And it wouldn't be long before the authorities stepped in. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. The next morning, I went into the office early, the tension palpable as I prepared for what was to come. Adam showed up an hour later, looking more stressed than I'd ever seen him. His usual cocky demeanor was gone, replaced by a man who knew something was seriously wrong. "Morning," I said casually as he walked in. "Yeah, morning," he muttered, not even looking me in the eye. We sat through a meeting with one of our clients. But Adam's mind was clearly elsewhere. I could see the cracks forming, his confidence unraveling bit by bit. He wasn't just worried anymore, he was scared. After the meeting, I caught him pacing in his office, his phone in hand. He was making frantic calls, but I knew it was too late. The investigation had already begun, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. As the day wore on, I kept an eye on him, waiting for the inevitable breakdown. Around noon, he finally snapped. I need to take the rest of the day off, he said, his voice shaky. Something's come up. Everything okay? I asked, feigning concern. Just personal stuff, he muttered, already heading for the door. I watched him leave, knowing full well what was coming next. By the time I got home that night, the news had already broken. Adam was under official investigation for financial misconduct. The reports were everywhere, online, on TV. Our company's name was being dragged through the mud, but I didn't care. This was about more than just the business now. Kate saw the news, too. She was sitting on the couch, staring at her phone when I walked in. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she read the headlines. John, she started, her voice barely a whisper. Did you know about this? I looked at her, my expression unreadable. I had my suspicions. Her eyes met mine, wide and filled with something that looked like fear. But whether it was fear of the investigation or fear that I knew about her and Adam, I couldn't tell. Not yet, anyway, but the storm had only just begun. The next few days were chaos. The investigation into Adam's financial misconduct spread like wildfire, and the news hit every corner of our industry. Clients started calling, concerned about their investments and how deep the scandal went. Kate and I spent hours on damage control, fielding emails, and answering questions, all while trying to keep the business from imploding. Through it all, Adam was nowhere to be found. He'd taken an indefinite leave of absence, no doubt trying to figure out how to salvage what was left of his reputation. But I knew it was only a matter of time before the authorities dug up enough to bury him for good. At home, Kate was quieter than usual. The strain was visible in her eyes, but she hadn't said a word about Adam or the affair. It was like we were both walking on thin ice, pretending that the only problem was the business when, in reality, the cracks in our marriage were growing wider by the day. One evening, after a particularly stressful day, Kate sat across from me at the dinner table, pushing her food around her plate. She'd barely touched it, and I could feel the tension radiating off her. I can't believe this is happening, she finally said, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. Everything we worked for, it's all falling apart. I looked at her, studying her face, trying to see past the facade. Did she regret the affair? Or was she just scared of what this meant for her life, for the business? We'll figure it out, I said, though my words felt hollow. I wasn't sure if I even believed them anymore. Kate set down her fork and rubbed her temples, her frustration boiling over. John, do you think there's any way to save this? The business, I mean. What if they dig deeper? What if they find something that puts us all at risk? I stayed silent for a moment, watching her squirm. She wasn't worried about saving the business. She was worried about herself. And that's when I realized, Kate wasn't just guilty of cheating. She had been in on it with Adam. Maybe not the financial fraud itself, but she knew. She had to. That's why she was so panicked. We'll survive, I finally said, my voice steady. But there's something you need to tell me first. Her eyes shot up to meet mine, wide with fear. What do you mean? I leaned back in my chair, my arms crossed. You and Adam, how long has it been going on? The color drained from her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence stretched between us. Heavy and suffocating. John, she started, but I cut her off. I already know, I said, my voice cold. I've known for weeks. Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no pity. Just the cold satisfaction of seeing her unravel. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered, her voice trembling. It was a mistake. I was confused, and Adam, he was just convenient? I finished for her. Easy to turn to when things got tough? She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back the tears. I'm sorry, John. I never wanted to hurt you. I shook my head, the bitterness rising in my throat. You didn't just hurt me, Kate. You destroyed everything. We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, broken promises, and the weight of a future that now seemed impossible to salvage. Finally, I stood up from the table, pushing my chair back. We'll figure out what to do about the business. But as for us, I don't know if there's anything left to save. I walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there alone, the silence echoing behind me. The fallout from Adam's scandal hit the business harder than I anticipated. Clients were pulling out left and right, and we were hemorrhaging money at a rate we couldn't control. Kate and I tried to keep things running, but the damage was done. The reputation we had built over years of hard work was gone in an instant. One morning, as I was reviewing our financials in the office, I got the call I'd been waiting for. The authorities had enough evidence to charge Adam with fraud. They'd seized his assets, frozen his accounts, and launched a full-scale investigation into his dealings. It was over for him, and soon, the rest of the industry would know it. But even as I heard the news, there was no sense of victory. No satisfaction. The revenge I had planned for so long felt hollow now. Adam was ruined, but so was our business. And Kate? Well, she was a shell of the person I thought I knew. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the stack of papers in front of me. The numbers didn't lie, we were finished. There was no coming back from this. The debts were piling up, and the clients we'd relied on were gone. It didn't matter how much we tried to spin the story, or how much we promised to recover. No one wanted to be associated with us anymore. Kate walked into the office a few minutes later, her face pale and drawn. She didn't say anything as she sat down across from me, her eyes scanning the papers on the desk. "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Bad," I replied. "We're finished." She nodded slowly as if she had been expecting it. I guess we knew this was coming." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. We both knew the truth, and no amount of words could change what had happened. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, the weight of everything crashing down around us. The business, our marriage, everything we had built was gone. And there was no one to blame but ourselves. "I never wanted this," Kate said suddenly, her voice breaking. "I never wanted any of this to happen." I looked at her, feeling the last shred of my anger fade away. I wasn't even sure I hated her anymore. We were both victims of our own choices, trapped in a cycle we couldn't escape. "Neither did I finally said, my voice tired. "But here we are." We sat there for a long time, neither of us knowing what to do next. The business was collapsing around us, and the life we had built together was in ruins. There was no going back, no fixing what was broken. The storm had come, and now all that was left was the wreckage. The days that followed were an unbearable blend of tension and waiting. With the business all but dead, Kate and I had no choice but to sit back and watch as everything we'd worked for crumbled. Lawyers, auditors, and angry clients became a constant in our lives. There were days I spent more time on the phone with attorneys than with Kate, though we barely spoke anymore. One afternoon, as I was reviewing the latest legal documents in our near-empty office, the phone rang. It was one of the partners from the law firm handling our case. "They're pushing for a settlement," he said, his voice matter of fact. "It's either that or they'll take you both to court." I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. The weight of it all was suffocating. "And the terms?" "It's rough, John. If you settle, you'll lose what's left of the business, assets, accounts, everything. But if you go to trial, they're going to drag you through the mud. The media's already sniffing around, and they'll make it ugly." I stayed silent for a moment, processing his words. It wasn't a decision I could make alone, even if Kate's opinion was the last thing I cared about now. "We'll discuss it," I finally said, hanging up the phone. Later that evening, I found Kate in the living room, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine. She hadn't been sleeping well, neither of us had, and it showed. Her eyes were dark and hollow, and the vibrant energy she once had was gone. I sat down across from her, my tone as calm as I could manage. "They're offering a settlement." She blinked, looking up at me with surprise. "Already?" "Yeah," I said, "but we'd lose everything. The business, our assets, everything we've worked for." She took a long sip of wine, her eyes focused on the glass. "Is there any point in fighting it?" I studied her for a moment. The woman in front of me wasn't the same person I'd married. The spark between us had died long before the affair, but now, sitting there with her, I realized just how far we'd fallen apart. "No," I replied honestly. "There's nothing left to fight for." She let out a breath, a tired, broken sound. "Then we settle." The words hung in the air, final and heavy. Neither of us moved for a while, both lost in our own thoughts. I wanted to feel relief, but all I could feel was the overwhelming sense of failure. We had built something together, something that was supposed to last a lifetime. And now it was gone. "We're going to lose everything, aren't we?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded, staring at the floor. "Yeah, we are." Kate looked away, the weight of her guilt and regret evident in every line of her face. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered everything that had led us to this point, her betrayal, Adam's lies, and my own relentless need for revenge. We had all played our parts in the downfall, and now we were paying the price. A few weeks later, the settlement was finalized. The company's remaining assets were sold off, our accounts drained to cover legal fees, and we signed away any hope of recovery. The media had picked up on the story, and though Adam was the main target, Kate and I were not spared from the public scrutiny. Our faces were splashed across business news outlets, headlines that told a story of greed, betrayal, and financial ruin. The company that had once been a pillar of the community was now a cautionary tale. People talked about us like we were characters in a tragic play, a spectacle of destruction for them to gawk at. The day after the settlement was complete, I sat in the empty office one last time. The space felt foreign now, stripped of everything that had once made it ours. The desks were bare, the walls empty. I glanced at the clock, knowing it was only a matter of hours before the movers came to take what was left. Kate walked in, her footsteps soft against the floor. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching me. I didn't acknowledge her, just kept staring at the window. "So this is it, huh?" she said quietly, stepping further into the room. I nodded. "Yeah, this is it." She sat down in the chair opposite me, her gaze distant. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick, filled with all the things we hadn't said to each other over the last few months. Maybe even the last few years. "We never stood a chance, did we?" she asked suddenly, her voice cracking. I finally looked at her, taking in the pain and regret on her face. "Maybe we did once, but not anymore." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I'm sorry, John, for everything." It was the apology I had been waiting for, the one I thought I needed. But now that it was here, it felt empty. Too late, too little. "I know," I said simply. I wasn't sure if I forgave her or if I ever would. But I didn't feel the need to punish her anymore. The damage was already done, and nothing could change that. "What are you going to do now?" she asked, her voice small. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess I'll figure it out. One step at a time." She nodded, her eyes searching my face for something. Maybe a sign that we could still salvage something between us. But I had nothing left to give. The love we once had, the partnership we'd built, it was all gone. "I'll be staying with my sister for a while," Kate said after a long pause. "I think we need some time apart." I nodded, not arguing. Time apart was exactly what we needed. Maybe it would help us heal, or at least come to terms with the mess we had made of our lives. She stood up, looking down at me one last time. "Goodbye, John." "Goodbye, Kate," I replied, my voice hollow. She left without another word, and the door clicked shut behind her. I was alone now, in every sense of the word. Alone in the empty office, along with the wreckage of our lives. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the space where our business had once thrived. The silence felt different now, heavier, like the weight of everything I had lost was pressing down on me all at once. But I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The end of one chapter, and the uncertain start of another. I stood up, taking one last look at the office before walking out the door. The future was unclear, but for the first time in months, I felt something like relief. Maybe now, I could finally start to rebuild. The days that followed Kate's departure were a strange blur of emptiness and unexpected relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by the business or by a marriage that had long since lost its spark. The silence, once suffocating, now felt almost liberating. I spent most of my time packing up the remnants of the company and cleaning out the office. It was a painful process, sorting through contracts, photographs, and old memories. Every file, every document felt like a reminder of what could have been. But as I boxed everything up, a part of me also felt lighter. I had no choice but to move forward now. One morning, I stood in the office for the last time. The movers had come and gone, and the space was completely bare. The air smelled of fresh paint. Whoever was taking over the lease had already begun preparing for their new venture. It was strange, standing there in the empty room where I had once dreamed of building something great. But those dreams were gone now, and I had to let go of what was lost. I left the office keys on the reception desk and walked out the door for the final time. Not bothering to look back. There was no point in holding on to what was already dead. A few days later, I found myself driving aimlessly through town. Without the business to keep me busy, I had too much time to think. My thoughts kept drifting back to Kate, wondering how she was coping, whether she was staying with her sister or moving on with her life in some other way. Part of me missed her, missed what we used to have, but I knew deep down that going back was impossible. I stopped by a small coffee shop we used to frequent. It was the kind of place where we'd spent lazy Sunday mornings, back when things were simpler and the weight of the world hadn't yet crushed us. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, watching people pass by on the street. As I stared into my cup, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. I had sought revenge, and I'd gotten it. Adam was under investigation, his career in tatters, and Kate's affair had been exposed. But in the end, my victory had come at a cost I wasn't sure I was willing to pay. My life, our life, was in ruins, and now I was left wondering if the price of revenge had been worth it. The door to the coffee shop opened, and I glanced up, surprised to see Kate walk in. She looked tired, but there was a sense of calm about her that I hadn't seen in months. She spotted me and hesitated for a moment before walking over. "John," she said softly, her voice hesitant. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I replied, gesturing to the seat across from me. "Join me?" She nodded and sat down, folding her hands on the table. We sat in silence for a few moments, the tension between us still palpable but no longer unbearable. "How are you?" I asked, breaking the silence. I'm okay," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "Staying with my sister has been good for me. I needed some time to think." I nodded, not sure what to say. There was a part of me that wanted to ask her how she felt about everything, about us, about the affair, about the business. But another part of me didn't want to open those wounds again. "I've been thinking too," I admitted. "About everything that's happened. About how we got here." Kate looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I've thought about it too. A lot." The silence stretched between us, but it felt different this time. Less like a wall and more like an understanding that we were both grappling with the same regrets. "I know I hurt you, John," she said quietly. "And I know I can't undo that. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly." I looked at her, searching her face for any trace of the woman I once loved. The woman who had betrayed me, yes, but also the woman who had stood by me through the early days of building the business, through the highs and lows. "I'm sorry too, Kate," I said, surprising myself with the words. For my part in all of this, I was so focused on revenge, on getting back at Adam, that I didn't see what it was doing to both of us. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, we sat there, just two people trying to make sense of the wreckage we'd created. "Where do we go from here?" she asked softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "But maybe we don't have to figure that out right now. Maybe we just take it one step at a time." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe you're right." And just like that, the conversation shifted. We didn't talk about the business, the affair, or the months of anger and betrayal. Instead, we talked about lighter things, about our plans for the future, about what we wanted out of life now that everything had changed. It was the first time in a long time that we weren't at each other's throats, and for the first time, I felt like there was a sliver of hope. Weeks passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. Kate and I still kept our distance, but we had started talking more frequently, trying to rebuild some semblance of trust. It wasn't easy, and there were still days when the weight of everything that had happened felt too heavy to bear. But there were also moments of clarity, moments when I realized that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. I had taken a job consulting for another company, helping them navigate some of the challenges I had once faced with my own business. It wasn't the same as running my own company, but it gave me purpose, and for that, I was grateful. One day, as I was sitting in my new office, my phone buzzed with a message from Kate. It was short and to the point, but it made me smile. "Kate, dinner tonight? Just to talk." I stared at the message for a moment, my mind racing with possibilities. We had been through so much, more than most couples could survive. But maybe, after everything, there was still something worth saving. I typed out a quick response, my fingers lingering over the keys before I hit send. Sure, let's talk." That evening, as I walked into the restaurant where we had agreed to meet, I felt a strange mix of nerves and hope. Kate was already seated at a table, looking up at me with a small, tentative smile. As I sat down across from her, I realized that I didn't know what the future held for us. Maybe we'd find a way back to each other, or maybe we'd go our separate ways. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared of the uncertainty. I was ready to face whatever came next, one step at a time. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Dinner with Kate that night was surprisingly peaceful. We talked about work, life, and the pieces we were both picking up, carefully avoiding the heaviest topics that hung over us like shadows. But I could feel it, an undercurrent of unspoken words, a tension that still lingered. There were questions I hadn't asked, and there were answers she hadn't given. As we finished our meal, I glanced up at Kate, the dim restaurant lighting softening her features. For a moment, I remembered the woman I had first fallen in love with, the one full of ambition and life. Somewhere along the way, we had lost each other. But now, after everything, I wondered if we could still find a way back. "John," Kate said softly, breaking my thoughts. "There's something I need to tell you." I met her gaze, sensing the weight of her words before she even spoke them. My heart tightened as I braced myself for whatever confession she was about to make. "I never told you the whole story about Adam," she continued, her voice faltering. "About why it happened." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the familiar rush of anger and betrayal start to rise. But I stayed quiet, waiting for her to explain. "I wasn't happy," she said, her eyes dropping to the table. "And I don't mean just in our marriage, though that was part of it. I wasn't happy with my life. The business, the stress, it all started to suffocate me. And Adam, he was an escape." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my emotions in check. I wanted to lash out, to remind her of the pain she had caused me, but I also knew that wouldn't get us anywhere. So instead, I listened. "I didn't plan for it to go as far as it did," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But once I started, I couldn't stop. He made me feel alive again, in a way I hadn't felt in years." I exhaled slowly, trying to process her words. Part of me understood, even if I didn't want to admit it. Our marriage had been crumbling long before the affair. We had both stopped trying, both let the business consume us until there was nothing left of us as a couple. "So why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Why not just come to me and say you were unhappy?" Kate looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of admitting that I had failed. Not just in our marriage, but in everything. I didn't want to lose what we had built together, even if it was falling apart." I sat in silence, the weight of her confession settling in. There was a strange sense of relief in hearing the truth, even if it didn't change the damage that had been done. For the first time, I saw the affair for what it really was, a symptom of something much deeper. Something that had been broken long before Adam came into the picture. "I'm not excusing what I did," Kate said, wiping away a tear. "I know I hurt you, and I regret it every day. But I wanted you to understand." I nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure if I fully understood yet. But maybe that was okay. Maybe understanding would come with time. "Thank you for telling me," I finally said, my voice softer now. "I needed to hear that." Kate offered a small, sad smile. "I know." We left the restaurant soon after, walking to our cars in silence. As I reached for my door handle, Kate turned to me. "John," she called out, her voice hesitant. "Do you think we'll ever be okay again? Not as a couple, but just, okay?" I looked at her, considering her question. I didn't know the answer, but I knew that we had both changed. We were no longer the same people who had once shared a life and built a business together. But maybe, in our own ways, we could still find a path forward. "I think we will be," I said. "One day." She nodded, seeming to take some comfort in my words, even if we both knew there was still a long road ahead. Months passed, and life continued to shift and change in unexpected ways. Kate and I kept our distance, though we occasionally checked in on each other. The process of moving on was slow, but it was happening. I found myself settling into my new consulting job, and though it wasn't the life I had envisioned, it felt good to be working again, something I could control. Something that didn't come with the baggage of the past. One evening, I found myself standing in front of the old office building. It was now home to a new business, a sleek tech startup that had taken over the lease. I hadn't been back since the day we cleared everything out, but something had pulled me there that night. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the need for closure. Either way, I needed to see it one last time. The lights inside were still on, the office bustling with life. It was strange to see new people in the space that had once been ours, but it also felt right. The company we had built was gone, and it was time to let it go. As I stood there, watching the new tenants through the glass windows, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Kate. Kate, I'm moving out of my sister's place. Found an apartment downtown. I stared at the message for a moment, feeling a strange mix of emotions. It wasn't a surprise. Kate had been talking about getting her own place for a while now, but seeing it in writing made it feel more final. She was moving on, just as I was. I typed out a quick response. That's good. I'm glad. Her reply came almost instantly. Kate, we should meet up sometime. Just as friends. I hesitated before responding. The idea of meeting up as friends felt both comforting and uncomfortable. We had been through too much to ever go back to what we once were, but maybe, in time, we could rebuild something new. Something different. Yeah, I'd like that. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and took one last look at the office building before turning to leave. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. The anger, the resentment, the need for revenge, they were all fading, replaced by a quiet acceptance of the way things had unfolded. Life hadn't gone the way I'd planned, and it had taken me a long time to accept that. But now, as I moved forward, I realized that maybe that was okay. Maybe the path I was on was the one I was meant to take all along. I didn't know what the future held, and for the first time in a long time. That uncertainty didn't scare me. I was ready to face whatever came next, one step at a time. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Life without Kate was quieter, more solitary. I had settled into my new routine, work, the gym, the occasional dinner with friends. But there was a part of me that still felt unsettled. It wasn't just about Kate or the business. It was about everything that had happened over the past year, the way my life had shifted and spun out of control before finally landing somewhere I barely recognized. One day, after a particularly long week of consulting work, I decided to take a drive out to the coast. There was a small town about an hour away, a place we had visited once years ago, back when things were good between Kate and me. I needed some space, some time to clear my head and breathe in the salty ocean air. When I arrived, the town was as quiet and charming as I remembered. The old lighthouse still stood on the edge of the cliffs, and the small cafes and shops lined the streets. Filled with tourists and locals alike. I parked my car near the beach and started walking along the shore, letting the rhythm of the waves calm my restless mind. As I walked, lost in thought, I almost didn't notice her. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a familiar figure sitting on a bench near the water. My heart skipped a beat when I realized it was Kate. She hadn't seen me yet, and for a moment, I considered turning around and walking away. But something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was the fact that, despite everything, I still cared about her. So I took a deep breath and approached. Kate? I called out softly. She looked up, surprised to see me, but her expression quickly softened. John, she said, a small smile playing on her lips. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing, I replied, sitting down beside her on the bench. I just needed to get away for a while. Clear my head. She nodded, glancing out at the ocean. Same here. This place always felt like a good escape. We sat in silence for a few moments, the sound of the waves filling the space between us. It was strange, being there with her, after everything that had happened. But it also felt familiar. How have you been? I asked, breaking the silence. Kate sighed softly. I've been okay. It's been hard, but I'm getting there. I finally moved into my new apartment, and I've started working on some new projects. Trying to figure out what's next for me. That's good, I said, genuinely happy to hear she was doing better. I'm glad. She turned to look at me, her eyes searching my face. And you? How are you holding up? I shrugged. I'm managing. Work keeps me busy, and I'm trying to focus on moving forward. It hasn't been easy, but I think I'm finally getting to a place where I can let go. Kate nodded, a thoughtful look on her face. Letting go is hard. Harder than I ever thought it would be. Yeah, I agreed. But maybe it's what we need. To let go, to move on. We sat in silence again, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the water. It was beautiful and peaceful. For a moment, I forgot about all the pain, all the betrayal. It was just the two of us, sitting by the ocean, watching the world go by. I never wanted it to end like this, Kate said softly, her voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. Neither did I admitted. But sometimes things end, even when we don't want them to. She nodded, her eyes distant. I know, but I still wish things could have been different. I didn't know what to say to that. There was a part of me that wished the same thing, that wished we could go back and fix everything that had gone wrong. But I also knew that wasn't possible. We had both changed too much, and there was no going back to what we once had. Instead, I reached over and placed my hand on hers, offering a silent gesture of understanding. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and gratitude. "Thank you, John," she whispered. "For everything." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We sat there for a while longer, watching the sun dip below the horizon until the sky was painted in hues of pink and orange. It was a moment of peace, a brief respite from the chaos of the past year. And in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we would be okay after all. The encounter with Kate at the coast stayed with me for days afterward. It was a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a faint glimmer of hope. We hadn't resolved everything, but it felt like we had found some kind of closure, an unspoken agreement to move on with our lives. A few weeks later, I received a call from one of my old business contacts. He was launching a new startup and wanted me to come on board as a senior consultant. It was an exciting opportunity, something that felt like the fresh start I had been searching for. The business world had always been my passion. And now, with the weight of the past finally lifting, I was ready to dive back in. I met with the team, discussed the details, and before I knew it, I was officially part of the project. It was exhilarating to be back in the game, to be building something new from the ground up. This time, I was determined to do things differently, no cutting corners, no letting stress and ambition consume me. I had learned too much from my mistakes to go down that road again. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I found myself walking through the city, enjoying the cool night air. I hadn't felt this alive in months, maybe even years. For the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to the future. As I passed by a familiar bar, I hesitated. It was the place where Kate and I had celebrated one of our first big business deals. We had been so full of hope and excitement back then, dreaming of everything we would accomplish together. I hadn't been back since the affair, but tonight, something drew me inside. The bar was quiet, only a few patrons scattered around. I found a seat at the counter and ordered a drink, letting the familiar hum of the place wash over me. It felt like I was closing a chapter, finally saying goodbye to the past. As I sipped my drink, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Kate. "Kate, I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to let you know that I've decided to take a job in another city. It's a fresh start for me, and I think it's what I need right now." I stared at the message for a moment, processing her words. A fresh start. It was exactly what we both needed. And though a part of me was sad to see her go, I knew it was the right decision. "I'm happy for you, Kate. You deserve a fresh start. Good luck with everything." Her response came quickly. "Kate, thank you, John. I hope you find happiness too." I smiled, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't expected. This was the end of an era, but it was also the beginning of something new. I finished my drink, paid the bill, and walked out into the night. The city lights flickered above me, and I felt lighter than I had in years. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, that uncertainty didn't scare me. Kate was right. I deserved to find my happiness, just as she deserved hers. And as I walked down the bustling streets, I knew that, whatever happened next, I was ready for it. A few months had passed since I last heard from Kate. Her move to another city felt like the final chapter closing on that part of my life. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight of the past was truly gone. I had thrown myself into my new role at the startup, working alongside a team of young, driven individuals who reminded me of what I used to be: hungry, ambitious, and full of potential. But this time, I was different. I no longer let ambition cloud my judgment, and I made sure to take time for myself, something I had neglected for far too long. One evening, after another long day of meetings, I received a call. It was from an unfamiliar number, but something compelled me to answer. "John? It's Kate." Her voice was soft, familiar, yet distant. I hadn't expected to hear from her again, at least not so soon. For a moment, I wasn't sure what to say. "Kate, hey, how are you?" "I'm good," she replied. "Better, I think. The new job, the new city, it's been exactly what I needed." "I'm glad to hear that," I said, meaning it. "You sound happier." "I am," she admitted. "But there's something I've been thinking about for a while. Something I wanted to talk to you about." I leaned back in my chair, my curiosity piqued. "Go ahead." There was a brief pause before she continued. I've been thinking about everything that happened. Not just the affair or the business, but us. The way we fell apart. I've had a lot of time to reflect, and I realize now that I wasn't fair to you. I should have been more honest, should have communicated better. Kate, I interrupted gently, we've been through this. We both made mistakes. I know, she said quickly. But I just wanted to apologize again. Not just for the affair, but for everything. I let things slip away, and I didn't fight for us the way I should have. I'm sorry, John. Her words caught me off guard. It wasn't the first time she had apologized, but there was something different about this time. It felt final, like she was truly letting go. I appreciate that, I said after a moment. But it's okay, Kate. We've both moved on, and I think that's for the best. We're in better places now. She was silent for a moment before responding. Yeah, I think so too. It's just, I didn't want to leave things unsaid. I want us both to be able to move forward without any regrets. I don't have any regrets, I said honestly. Not anymore. What happened between us? It taught me a lot. About myself, about what I want out of life. And in some strange way, I think it made me better. She let out a soft laugh. I'm glad to hear that. I think it made me better too. We talked for a little while longer, catching up on the little things, her new apartment, and my progress with the startup, but eventually, the conversation drifted to a natural close. Take care of yourself, John, she said softly. You too, Kate. And just like that, the call ended. I sat there for a few moments, staring at my phone, letting the conversation sink in. It felt like the final piece of closure I didn't even know I needed. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The startup was thriving, and I had found a rhythm that worked for me. But there was something else, something beyond work that I realized I wanted. It was time to build a life for myself, one that wasn't defined by the past or the people I had lost. I spent the next few weeks focused on myself, trying new things, meeting new people, and, for the first time in a long time, allowing myself to dream again. The scars from my marriage were still there, but they were healing. And with every passing day, I felt more and more like the person I had always wanted to be. One Saturday morning, I found myself walking through the park near my apartment. The air was crisp, the trees beginning to turn shades of red and gold as fall settled in. I stopped by a small cafe and ordered a coffee, sitting outside on the patio and watching the world go by. As I sat there, I thought about the journey I had been on, the highs and the lows, the love and the loss. It had been a long road, but I was finally on the other side of it. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, I was excited to find out. I took a sip of my coffee, the warmth spreading through me as I smiled to myself. This was my life now, imperfect, unpredictable, but entirely mine. And I was ready for whatever came next.